You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, listeners. We're so excited to have the amazing Madeline Martin with us today. She's a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of about 37 novels. Wow, Madeline, this is impressive. She writes historical romance, historical fiction, with strong heroines and tons of high-action plot twists. Her books have finaled in the Holt Medallion Award and the National Excellence in Romance Fiction Awards. You will recognize her name from the absolute wonderful book that she wrote called The Last Bookshop in London. It was an instant hit. People have been talking about it relentlessly. It really added something spectacular to the current selection of World War II novels. It's a whole different spin. We highly recommend it. But what we're here to talk to her about today is her latest book called The Librarian Spy. Library Journal says, and I quote, "During a time of crisis, can we deny the comfort of books and reading? This book by Madeline Martin is deftly written, a testimony to survival in a challenging time. This book is a soothing and reassuring read." Kristen and I could not agree more. Madeline lives in sunny Florida with her two daughters, known collectively, and I had to laugh at this, as the Minions.
Yes.
one incredibly spoiled cat, and a man so wonderful, he's been dubbed Mr. Awesome. That's really cute. I thought that was so cute. She also loves to travel, attributing her fascination with history to having spent much of her childhood as an army brat in Germany. Yes. Very interesting. Madeline, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Madeline, we like to give our listeners a little bit of the background in the book. We don't give away any spoilers. So if you'll allow me, I'll just briefly tell people a little bit about what the book is about.
Oh, yes, please do.
And if you want to add anything, we would love to hear it. But again, I'm very careful about what we tell people because we want to encourage everyone, obviously, to pick up the book. In The Librarian Spy, we follow the story of two courageous women during World War II. Ava is an American. She thought her job as a librarian with the Library of Congress would mean a quiet, routine existence surrounded by her beloved books. But the U.S. military comes calling, and she is sent to Lisbon, Portugal for a new direction, and she starts gathering intelligence on behalf of the military. Elaine is a French woman living in occupied France. The Nazis have systematically and fundamentally changed their lives in Lyon, where she lives. And Elaine has begun an apprenticeship at a printing press run by members of the French resistance. This is a job that men usually have, but everything is different now with the war on. And now the Nazis are searching for the press and the printers who run them in order to silence them. As the war spreads and rages on in Europe, Ava and Elaine find themselves connected through coded messages and possibly courage, hope, survival. What a wonderful, fantastic book. Would you add anything in terms of some of the facts?
Thank you so much. Really just to say that I was inspired by reality with the librarians, the American librarians. They really were recruited by the Office of Strategic Services and sent over to neutral countries, a lot of times without any training. And then, so that's where the idea for Ava's character came from. And then with Elaine Rousseau's character in Lyon, France, that actually came from a woman who actually existed during the French resistance, and she worked in the printing press. And so I really used her for strong inspiration for Elaine's character.
we had thought that this had been based on some type of truth, which makes it even all the more interesting, because so many little stories happened during World War II that we're unaware of behind the scenes. And thank you for drawing that to the reader's attention. It's a beautiful story. So you also, as the writer, showed us the absolute importance of the written word. Ava said, words have power. James said, words are the resistance among oppressors. Words rival heavy artillery, the strength in its rawest form. During your book, clandestine newspapers were secretly printed. Poems were used as secret codes. Ava showed us the importance of books. She said they were a friend in a foreign, lonely place, a liberation of one's mind. As the writer of this beautiful story, I wonder if you could expand on what your feelings were or what your intentions were in the creation of these beautiful characters as far as their belief and your belief in the importance of the written word.
You know, I think it was such a hugely important thing, specifically when you came to these like clandestine presses, because they couldn't have weapons. You know, they could be killed for having them. There was so little that they felt like they could do, but they had words. And, you know, anybody who has been moved to tears by reading a book or by listening to a speech, or has been enraged by that, or gotten full body chills because something so wonderful that you read just makes your whole body tingle, though, that's the power of the written word. And it really is very, very powerful. I mean, it grabs your heart and it can lead you wherever you need to go. And so the French resistance really did rein in a lot of this like power that they could use with the written word. When it came to the French resistance, they basically were doing these clandestine papers to try to get more people to join the resistance, which were more people who were opposing the Nazis. But also they were trying to counteract the spread of disinformation that the Nazis were using for propaganda to try to bring, to discourage the French and keep everybody down. So it really was incredibly important to have these newspapers. And as a result, it was incredibly dangerous because the Nazis were always on the lookout to try to shut down these print shops because of exactly how effective they were with their communication. And then, from Ava's perspective, well, I made her a reader and I'm a reader. And so of course there's a lot of love and gushing for books and really what they mean to her. And also her appreciation truly for reading these papers that are coming out of these Nazi occupied zones and appreciating the level of danger that people are putting themselves into just so that they can make sure to put this out for everybody else to read and be affected by.
And as the reader, we couldn't help but sense this overwhelming feeling of freedom in the midst of war with being able to have these clandestine periodicals printed. You had a little voice. Even I loved this coding. They found different ways to code within poetry and stories. I just was so enamored with that. And I thought two things. Everyone could be a voice, even when you think maybe you don't have a voice in some secret way. You showed us that with both characters, Ava and Elaine, but also just the freedom of speech and the freedom of press and how we so appreciate that in this country, but how easily it can be taken away.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really is. It does give you so much more of a platform to be able to just speak whatever it is that you need to. And having that freedom taken away, I mean, it must be so incredibly difficult. And having to operate underneath, their noses like that really was so incredibly dangerous. One quick little aside, I was very fortunate. I got to travel to Lisbon and to Lyon for research for this book. And when I was in Lyon, I actually got to see the press that was used by the woman who inspired my character. And that was just, mind blowing. Wow. It was really, really amazing.
And I really enjoyed how you took us through the steps of the printing press in those times and really spelled out how difficult it was to print things. Now we have computers and automatic printer, but the amount of work and effort and thought, it was enormous.
Yeah, it really was. And, it's interesting because Lyon was actually the printing capital of France during the Renaissance. And so you had no shortage of people who were willing to write articles and to offer their opinions and to give their information. But it was actually very difficult to find people who were typographers, who could do the engravings, who were able to actually man the printing press. And, especially the manual printing press, it really was something of a dance, kind of trying to put a paper on, take it off, and the whole time your foot is doing the little pedal, and you had to make sure there was enough ink, and it was a lot. So, and I did a lot of research on it, and it was really very incredibly fascinating.
It sounded it very much so.
Thank you.
I'd like to pick up on another theme we alluded to in the opening. World War II impacted women in so many unique ways, especially with regard to domestic responsibilities. You know, women were taking over many things at home, even defense preparation, victory gardens, you know, rearing children maybe without their spouse. But it also impacted women in terms of entering the workforce in roles that traditionally were male dominated. In fact, I think it's something like 5 million women entered the American workforce between 1940 and 1945, something that obviously reshaped not only the economy, but also perceptions of what women could do. Right. And I loved that in your book, several of the characters were doing jobs that were traditionally held by men or performed by men. And I wanted to know if you could comment on that a little bit. Do you think World War II itself and that change shifted fundamentally the way that women are viewed as to what they could or should be doing?
I definitely think that it was the start of a big shift. And I say that because, and I'll kind of start with like the more negative part and then kind of end on a positive. But, you know, unfortunately, a lot of these women after World War II ended, their jobs ended as well. And a lot of them really were bereft afterwards because they had these incredible jobs that they were doing. They had all of this responsibility. They had purpose in a way that they really had never had before. And after World War II ended, they were the first ones who were let go from all of their positions as the men were coming back home. And to go from having like the sense of purpose and the sense of doing something for your country and that you're proud of, and then to just be stuck at home to make casseroles. And, you know, a lot of women really, really, truly struggled with that. I do kind of touch on that a little bit in the last bookshop in London. And unfortunately, women really did have to fight through a lot of male stereotypes. So even though they did have a lot of these jobs where they were able to perform them to the same degree, if not sometimes more so, than the men, a lot of times the men really didn't respect them for what they were able to do. So I think sometimes in a lot of cases, these women had to work probably twice as hard to be able to get a similar, if not just slightly below, recognition that men did. But I definitely do think that it did open the eyes of a lot of people to the capability of women and really what they could accomplish. And once women were able to start getting back into the workforce again, I'm sure that a lot of these women, because some of them were able to keep those jobs, not all of them had to get rid of them, but it did definitely lay a foundation for women being able to enter the workforce and be very effective at what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I have a grandmother who, during the war, she went to work at Bell Aerospace, and it was a job that could never have been contemplated that a woman would do, let alone be in that building. But she joined a whole lot of other women and, you know, took on that role. And of course, after the war, she went back to her role as a homemaker. And I remember her telling me about that experience, and I was just shocked. I had no idea. But when you talk about necessity bringing about situations that we don't anticipate, you know, sometimes it's a good thing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's really awesome.
Yeah, that's very cool, Kristen. I also loved this in your book that Ava said, there is no room for love in this war, referring to her courtship prospects and some romantic interests. And Elaine also thought, she's not wrong, because we're still so many things from us. And I thought about this as the reader: safety, food, shelter, careers, relationships. But as a reader, you showed me a little bit that maybe Ava was wrong a little. I saw her evolve and grow as a character, and in the end, I felt that maybe it was love that kept her going all along. The prospect of love, the love for each other, the love for people we didn't even know who were suffering in the war she had yet to meet. Were you striving to show this growth in her? And what were the characteristics, do you think, that helped her to evolve into such a beautiful character? I loved taking that journey with her.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I definitely do think that love was an integral part of her character. I mean, because really love, even though she did these little acts of defiance, she still really did, respect her husband enough to not engage in, with the resistance initially. And I'm trying not to do too many spoilers on that.
Right, it's
so I'm kind of like tiptoeing around it. but, you know, really, I think that when it comes to love, love is such an integral part of war. You know, it could be something where it is a deep-seated love that goes through the entire course of the book that really is what's keeping that character going. Or it could even be something fast and fleeting that offers a moment of reprieve from this really horrible world that they've been involved in. But, you know, as far as Elaine's character goes, yes, that absolutely was part of her character growth. And, you know, when she was saying that, it was at a very, very dark point in her life. And so that really was reflective of her character and what her character would have thought about love at that moment. But in hindsight, I think that with her looking back and really at the end, realizing the power of love and how much it really could force her to do that, I think that maybe would have been difficult. So, and I think also at that point when she was thinking that about love is with love, I really do.
It's okay.
With
love.
love.
Pets, cats, dogs.
I know, I'm telling you, it's like everyone's home. But, you know, when it comes to love in war, also, it's a vulnerability. So when you think about Elaine's character, when she goes into this, she really doesn't have anything to lose. You know, there are no children. You know, it's she. And so the more people that you love, the more that you hold dear, the more vulnerable you are. The more vulnerable you are, and the more opportunities that you have to really be wounded and very deeply.
So true. When you're already hurting, you don't always open your heart so much. But the other side to that coin in your story were the love of friendship. And
Yeah.
you showed us that through war, people become very close very quickly. They relied upon each other. They were working towards the same goal or quest, or all of a sudden they found themselves on the same side of a bitter battle. And these friendships that evolved so quick but so strong were beautiful. And I don't want to give any spoilers there either, but there was a lot of character growth in this book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do a lot of work on my character charts before I even work on my plot.
Yeah, it's evident. And also, anytime I saw love, I also saw hope. And I thought that was a really inspiring part of your book. I want to kind of switch to something that's a little bit darker because I think it relates actually to what we're talking about. When the Allied forces entered the concentration camps at the close of World War II, the world was aghast at the atrocities that had occurred there. And, you know, I thought about this. There were rumors about these atrocities in military circles and diplomatic circles and in the stories of the refugees. So why didn't we know more about what had been occurring? And I was wondering if you thought that could be connected to maybe some prejudice against refugees and the stories we're hearing. Because your book really did highlight the plight of refugees, some of the prejudices they had to endure, the difficulties and obstacles. And I saw where throughout your story you have a real heart for people who are displaced. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, you know, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the American public also knew about what was happening. A lot of times newspapers were running these articles. They weren't highlighting the front page. They weren't highlighting the front page. They basically were kind of buried in the back. A lot of times what was highlighting the front page was like, oh, new recipe for your rations and things like that. You know, it was really kind of trying to keep American morale up and everything when it came to the war. But I think one of the reasons why a lot of people really didn't, I guess, quote unquote, know about it. I think a lot of people did know about it. I think a lot of people had their head in the sand about it, but also a lot of people felt like it wasn't real. A lot of people really chalked it up to war rumors, because when you hear about millions of people are being killed because of a prejudice toward their religion, toward their culture, it's hard to swallow. And so a lot of people are like, oh, is that really the truth? And so I think that had a lot to do with it. Prejudice definitely had a lot to do with it as well, unfortunately. And then also there was fear. There was always this reference of something that's referred to as the fifth agent. And apparently this is not just a thing in America. And it's also not just relegated to World War II, because I've heard about it from other countries and our country in other wars as well. And essentially what the fifth agent is somebody who goes, somebody who's part of the enemy that goes over to America or wherever under the auspices of being a refugee, where they then go and almost plant the seeds of insurrection and you know, terror and like terrorism, terroristic activities. and really is able to get into the network basically because they're pretending to be a refugee coming in. And, it's something that people were terrified of, because when you think about, especially in America, we're very insulated. We're covered by a whole ocean away from what was going on in Europe. And to think about a bad seed being planted and really spreading weeds throughout all of America, and then now we've been infiltrated by the Nazis. What's going to happen to America? It was a very, very scary thing for people to really consider. And it's interesting too, because I definitely do think, going back to the issue, unfortunately, of prejudice and how much that really did implicate things as well. I definitely have to say that, yes, I agree with that. I recently was in DC and I went to the Holocaust Museum, and I didn't realize it, but they were trying to pass something where at least 20,000 children, Jewish children, would be able to be accepted into America, and it did not pass. Wow. And these were children. These were not consummate spies who were trying to sneak into our border. These were children. And unfortunately, it did not pass. So sadly, I think that was a big part of it as well.
It reminds me of the ships that had Jewish refugees and were not allowed to put into port in different places around the world, yeah. Which is just astounding. That's one of the things I know we both loved about your novel, and that is these themes resonate with us today because we still are dealing with things like the press and truth and refugees and prejudice and, yeah. Of course, also hope and inspiration where we can find it. So yeah. What a fantastic story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, it was a beautiful story. I'll just put a little side note. I have one of my uncles was one of the first men into Auschwitz, and he was appalled by what he saw also. And part of me wondered, this was, let's look back, 1945, 1940. In our country back then, maybe people put this out of their mind. We didn't have R-rated movies. We were not exposed to the things that we can so easily see today on the internet or movies. And I think even more so in their minds, they didn't want to believe that it was real, maybe knew that it was, but it's a very odd phenomenon when you just want to put something out of your head, not address it, ignore it, pretend it's not real because you just can't face it.
Right.
But he said it was, he told some stories before he'd passed, and it was just worse than he could have ever have imagined.
Oh, I can't even imagine how horrible that must have been. I also think that in times of strife, humans have a lot of self-preservation at hand as well. So even though Americans weren't necessarily in the line of fire per se, you still did have blackouts. You did still have, again, the threat of like the fifth agent. You had the threat of what if they did come and bomb us. You still had to deal with rationing and how you're still going to feed your kids, and we do get caught up sometimes in some of our daily life things, like little Timmy's birthday is coming up and I only have so much sugar. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately those things have a tendency to overwhelm people sometimes when you're not in a sense of a normal life per se, which is something that we can definitely appreciate with having come through with the pandemic and everything. But it was very, very, it's so heartbreaking to see how many newspapers really were reporting this, and really how it really didn't seem to resonate, unfortunately, until it was far, far too late.
I felt your story also showed us very clearly how we are all interconnected. Every country, the two characters in your book that you write about, and I don't want to give any spoilers, did not know each other, but ended up working unbeknownst to each other on the same cause until they finally, I just loved it when they finally met and everything. And it just does sort of prove that even though something is happening in a different state or a different country, don't think that we're not affected, because we all are. As human beings, we all are. If someone suffers, it's the possibility that this could happen here too. Or we empathize, we sympathize, we feel for them. And I felt that your book really pulled that out in a beautiful way.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. And it was so wonderful too, in my research, getting to see how many of the allies really truly did work so well together to really perform some of these incredible feats to help other people.
Well, as I said when we started, for our listeners, there have been a lot of books written lately about World War II. In my opinion, and Kristen's, there can't be enough. And this is a very special book. It's very unusual, comes at it from a little different angle, a little more subtle in some ways, but just beautiful. We highly recommend it. And Madeline, can you give us any clues of what's on your radar? What are you working on now?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I actually just got back from Poland a few weeks ago, doing research in Warsaw for my next book called The Keeper of Hidden Books. It is currently on Goodreads, shameless plug, without a cover, without a blurb, but on the review section, I don't give myself stars, but under the review section, I have little notes about how the story is going and everything. So if anybody would like to sort of follow the progress of The Keeper of Hidden Books, they can do so there.
I spotted that and I saw that there was no cover and I was trying to figure out what that was. So thank you. That sounds very
You're
interesting.
welcome. Thank you. And I'm super excited because my editor actually just reached out, kind of confirming the idea for an overall structure for a blurb and asking me for cover suggestions. So we'll see. I'm
We
excited.
can't wait to see where all of our
Thank
listeners,
you.
you're going to definitely want to read this beautiful book, Librarian Spy by Madeline Martin. And in the meantime, you're going to want to connect with her. You can find her on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and even Pinterest. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's just such a pleasure talking to you about this very important story. Beautiful writing.
Thank you,
Thank you
Madeline.
so much. It was such a pleasure to be here with you ladies on Bookstorm. I really appreciate it.
Well, we hope to see you again here.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it was so great talking to her. And once again, World War II. And I mean, you just can't help but be enamored with it. And what about this notion I have to go back to about the importance of the written word? And it hit me in today's society a little. I don't know about you, Kristen. Everything that people think they're reading in a textbook or something that's been on Facebook or maybe something in a newspaper or a magazine, we immediately think because it's in writing that it's true. But over COVID, we've been hearing this term fake news, fake news. And I think it's called our attention to don't assume that everything written is true. Research it and investigate it. I think that gets us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the written word and the power of the written word, we know that it is powerful. It moves people to action. I mean, all you have to do is look at historically some novels that changed entire industries, like the meatpacking industry, and of course, issues relating to slavery. Look at the impact of Roots. So we know that fiction, we know that the written word is powerful, but it could be twisted to serve other ends that are not exactly legitimate. And that's where I think that idea of the fake news comes in. You know, people who are pushing these fake news narratives know that the written word is powerful and that it moves people to action, sometimes illicit action. And so I love what you said, because we see where it can be used as a force for good, but it can also be used as a force for ill.
Absolutely. And you as a lawyer probably see this in trial. So you mention something and you state something, whether it is writing or not, person gets it in their head and they subliminally sort of think, oh, I heard this somewhere. This is true. I read this somewhere. I saw, well, that can't be true. I saw this the other day. And I get so agitated with that. That's probably one of my pet peeves when people state some truth that they've heard somewhere without checking it.
It's funny you say that. I had a situation once early in my career. We were trying a case, and the opposing counsel made an insinuation to the jury. Now, we were thinking on our end, we're going to ignore that. Nobody would believe that's ridiculous. The trial wasn't even about what he said. He was just trying to cast some shadow on the attorneys. Well, lo and behold, we ended up winning. But when we polled the jury afterwards, do you know that one issue came up repeatedly and the jurors were bothered about that for days? Now, I was thinking to myself, that had nothing to do with the legal issue in the case. It was silly. We ignored it because it was so dumb. Yet, you put that in their mind and they started running with it.
And we all do this. This is why we love the National Enquirer and all of these little gossip columns. We can't help but take a little peek and see what's going on, because we kind of look for and enjoy the fantastical, the rumors and the gossip. It piques our interest and we think we've got an in on some little secret news. And I think that crosses over into real news that could be dangerous. We want to have the little side information that no one else has, and we run with it, thinking this is juicy, I've got it. I could see that would happen. Anything else that hit you that you want to share about Madeline?
Oh, there are so many things. First of all, I was fascinated by the idea of women moving into these roles that were traditionally male dominated. You know, you and I we're old enough that we've probably experienced this a bit, where we came into a position that didn't have a lot of women before us that we could look at as a role model. I certainly didn't. I started my career in intellectual property litigation. I never once had an opposing counsel who was female, never once. And it was an area that very much was dominated by men until the years that I started coming in. Mm-hmm. So in her novel, I loved the idea that women were doing these very physical jobs, very dangerous jobs, even outside of the threat of Nazi occupation. These were dangerous jobs to begin with because these were very heavy pieces of machinery and equipment. Mm-hmm. So just seeing women in these roles and highlighting for their children that they could and should take on these kinds of jobs, I thought was excellent and resonates even today.
Mm-hmm. I love that you asked her that question because in the 40s, yes, women did not go to college as much unless they were nurses or teachers. This is just the sad truth. But probably they were running the household. And a home is a pretty hefty responsibility with the raising of human beings. But then they were given some very important jobs that the world would foresee as being more important. And they did phenomenal, and they rocked them. Then they went back, and I think it put the idea in these women's minds, we can do more. Then you saw more women going to school for business or law or doctor or considering, and this is part of the whole women's movement, and I love that. I love that you asked Madeline that question. It was an important turning point.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, what's on your radar, Chris?
Well, I just love this book that Madeline wrote, and I guess the most thing that my big takeaway from this is don't wait for a catastrophe or a hardship to make you believe in yourself. Or don't wait for a hardship or a calamity to make you appreciate what you have or embrace relationships and love. Like I'm more of a touchy-feely type of person, so I always come out of here with a renewed sense of emotion in some way. And my thing in this was just this hope to go for whatever you want to go for, to seize every opportunity and every day, don't take any day for granted. And I just was so very uplifted by this story. You would think World War II would be make you more sad or downtrodden, but this was a very hope-filled, you used the word hope, very hope-filled story. Yeah. How about you?
Oh, excellent. Well, I've really been focusing on this idea of women in these non-traditional roles, and that's something I'm exploring a little further on the legal end, just first of all out of curiosity, but also as kind of a character exploration. So
I love it. Yeah. Go for it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give a little shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer, and we're calling him producer because pretty much he does everything around here and puts the chairs down and tells us to sit, and everything's taken care of. This is the Mr. Mark Carey. Mark, say hi.
Hello. Hope you guys enjoyed the show this week.
I'm sure they did, and we have such a busy summer lineup that we are so excited. Got to tell you who we've got coming. Ellen Marie Wiseman, The Lost Girls of Willowbrook. Karen Slaughter, Girl Forgotten. Jamie Brenner, Guilt. Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen, The Golden Couple. Kathleen Senner in The Bodyguard. Lori Lico Albanese and Hester. Julie Clark in The Lies I Tell. And Viola Shipman, The Edge of Summer.
As you're going through that list, Chris, I'm thinking about how awesome those books were. I cannot wait to air those interviews.
Exciting.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. Visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our amazing authors in person, you can view the videotape portion of this podcast on YouTube. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.